as I was starting to explore the space, everything was about money. Bitcoin as digital gold, it was stable coins as this global payment rails. That's really exciting, but ultimately what I wanted to do was bring this technology to scale. People don't really spend, all their time on Charles Schwab or their bank accounts watching stuff go up and down. I mean, that's like the 20,000 people in crypto today. They'll look at their wallet go up and down all day, but that's just not a typical thing people do. People will spend hours, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day on TikTok, Netflix, YouTube, creating and consuming culture.
Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. All right, on Coinage today, one of the most anticipated projects in the world of IP and really creativity on-chain. Excited to have on with us the co-founder of Story Protocol, Jason Zhao, on Coinage. Jason, so good to see you, man.
Hey, Zach. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a fun one, I think, because, as all of our Coinage NFT holders, as our members know, we are a DAO co-op building creativity with our viewers. So I know we're going to get into some specifics here, but what you guys are doing right now with Story, dare I say, much larger in terms of, I think, the overall market and truly the amount of money that you guys have been raising is super large in the space right now. So a lot to celebrate. Congrats on all of that. I think for a lot of our viewers, though, they're just excited to learn more about what Story Protocol is trying to solve and how it'll help creators, I think, moving forward in this age of Web3 and AI. So I figured maybe we just start with kind of where the idea came from, because you might be the most qualified founder we've ever had on Coinage to date, the youngest project manager at DeepMind, also a Stanford college grad as well. So why don't we just start with the background, how Jason Zhao came to be a co-founder at Story?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, as you pointed out, like my background's in AI. So I studied philosophy in university, and then I spent a couple years at DeepMind as a product manager. And so my focus there was always, how do you take abstract technical research, like the reinforcement learning models coming out of AlphaGo, AlphaZero, these sort of really interesting abstract projects that were playing chess, beating the best chess players in the world, beating the best Go players in the world, playing StarCraft. And how do you take that research in AI and bring it to production? So I've always been really obsessed with, taking things from 0 to 1 and then scaling them from 1 to 1,000 and making them useful. But that was actually originally in the world of AI. The way that I got into blockchain in general, and then also how specifically I got interested in IP, was through that experience at DeepMind. So around 2020, 21, I started looking into the Bitcoin, Ethereum white papers. It was kind of starting to be DeFi summer. So I was looking at Maker, I was looking at Uniswap, I was looking at these early protocols. And one thing that really struck me was how fast these ideas were being taken from research to production. So you had Hayden Adams writing the Uniswap white paper, and then in a few months, it was being built out, and then anyone in the world could leverage it. There was millions of dollars being traded on those rails. People were forking it. People were building on top of it. There was vampire attacks. It was this like very open, organic, and Darwinian space for technical research to turn into useful products. And that's not the case in AI, right? Because you have maybe 5 or 6 companies in the world with the economies of scale and compute in data and in capital that can actually do research. So it's actually much, much slower in that world. And then, as I mentioned, I studied philosophy and in particular a lot of political theory while I was at university. And as I was reading these white papers, I couldn't help but notice that there's such a libertarian bent to the early research that was being done, right? It was like Vitalik and Satoshi. They had a very specific political bent. That's unique, I think, in the history of technology, where most of the times it comes out of a very large corporation or comes out of some sort of research university as a purely technical concepts, and then the politics maybe gets mingled in later. That's not the case with blockchain. And that early libertarian wave was interesting, but then as I'm sure you are aware, at Coinage you guys are a DAO, but that's what everyone was talking about in 2020, 21, right? People were talking about, well, we should build a co-op, right? We should have these experiments in governance as exactly as you guys are doing. And that's a little different, I would say, politically than libertarianism. It's almost like a communitarianism. Some would argue that it's like more socialist or more democratic at least. And so I was really excited intellectually as well to think about, how this technology could be so nascent, but already have like is serve this political mirror function where like if you're a libertarian, you can kind of see how this would help you achieve your goals. If you're a
Yeah.
socialist or communitarian, you could see how this could help you achieve your goals. And of course, there's also a lot of, let's say, unbridled capitalism in the space. And so if you're a pure capitalist, you can also see, this technology as a political mirror. So that got me really excited about blockchain. And as I was starting to explore the space, everything was about money. It was Bitcoin as digital gold. It was stable coins as this global payment rails. And that's really exciting. But ultimately, like I think what I wanted to do was bring this technology to scale. And people don't really spend, all their time on Charles Schwab or their bank accounts watching stuff go up and down. I mean, that's like the 20,000 people in crypto today. They'll look at their wallet go up and down all day. But that's just not a typical thing people do. People will spend hours 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day on TikTok, Netflix, YouTube, creating and consuming culture. And a couple things I saw at DeepMind convinced me that, like the need for IP infrastructure in general was going to be the biggest problem and one of the best suited for blockchain. The first was that, I because I was at DeepMind, I was able to see a lot of these models before they were released. So I could see
Hmm.
ChatGPT, like we had a version of ChatGPT internally before OpenAI had released it to the public. So I could kind of live in the future. And it was very clear to me that the first thing that was going to be changed was creativity, right? It was going to be images, videos, creative like prose. And you're already seeing this in Hollywood where like the landscape of creativity is forever going to be changed. But then the counter side to that is that we have no idea what we're doing on the legal side. And that's something that's very clear to me every time I talked to the lawyers. It was like everything was a gray area. Every single thing
Yeah.
was a gray area. And we had no idea how we're going to compensate creators. And now we're starting to see these lawsuits against OpenAI. We're starting to see all these little cracks at the edges. And so the thought was, well, blockchains are this global ledger that provide digital property rights. And right now they've provided digital property rights in the form of money and in the world of finance. But actually nothing has really been done to scale that technology to the world of content and IP, where most people actually operate and live and breathe. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of how I got into the space, and also the sort of seeds of the ideas that would eventually become what we're building now at Story.
I would very much agree with all of that in terms of kind of the boom bust excitement cycle of NFTs
Yeah.
and DAOs and everything that, there was so much hype and then so much that went wrong. You're going to have that in crypto, but for sure, I would agree that it's kind of also why I am now here in this studio, giving up my past jobs, cushy jobs at Yahoo and CNBC as an anchor there to kind of pioneer what we're doing as a DAO co op in the media space, because I had the same kind of click moment where it was, okay, Bitcoin revolutionized finance. Ethereum's kind of trying to do the same. As you said, we got stablecoins, but nothing really beyond it. And perhaps not a coincidence that A16Z, Andreessen, and Chris Dixon kind of pioneering this idea of explaining what read, write, own is all about, what co-ownership in the era of Web3 is all about, being huge backers for you guys. And we can get into some of those creativity aspects later on in the interview, but I do want to give props and congrats to you guys because for being founded in 2022, you've now raised, I believe, $140 million to date. The new round valuation more than $2 billion, $2.25 billion. And I was looking at your guys' manifesto, and I feel like maybe it's worth getting into some of the specifics around how you guys are looking to help creators in the era of Web3, or sorry, of kind of broken IP in the era of AI, because I think it's quite interesting to dig into the specifics, and a lot of our viewers, members, have questions for you, Jason. I'm like, okay, how does that all work? So I wanted to start with kind of this reading from the manifesto because I think it's really cool. Story Protocol will usher in a new era of entrepreneurial creators and will offer existing IP holders an entirely new way to engage audiences and advance their IP. So when it comes to kind of how you saw this play out at DeepMind, you're right. You had a couple years head start on a lot of other people before they saw ChatGPT. But I guess kind of get into the solution now, if we understood the problem, kind of how Story is going to help creators in that sense.
Yeah, so the quote that you brought up is a good one because it allows me to paint a picture of, what this looks like if Story succeeds, and then I can kind of back in from that concrete example into something, more general, and why a solution in general is useful. So, a very specific vision that we have at Story is, as evidenced by the quote, is that just like Shopify and the internet allowed this new wave of entrepreneurs to rise up, right? Where I can, if I was selling T-shirts on the internet, like I can actually generate revenue from that. Or if I create a Shopify store that's meant to sell online classes, I can generate revenue from that. And I don't need to have a massive audience. I don't need to be Walmart in order to generate revenue, right? So I think what the internet in general has done is create a new class of entrepreneurs, but it feels like creators haven't been fully brought into that picture. And so what Story is trying to do is to give creators the tools for them to be able to own the IP that they produce, be able to easily license and monetize that IP, and almost be able to strike out on their own, right? And I'm sure you understand from Hollywood, that's not the model that's happening today. It's a model where if you're an artist or if you're a screenwriter, you are getting hired by a large studio, and you could create a character or create some sort of world, and then the studio takes it, generates hundreds of millions of revenue, and then you have no skin in the game. And so we want to kind of reverse that model where ownership starts with the creator, and then we give them the ability to set the terms for how others can use their IP. And instead of needing a entire legal team to enforce that and to help create these complex one-to-one licensing deals, you don't need any of that. You don't need to leverage the opaque and expensive existing system. You can simply set the terms for what you want other people to do with your IP and how they can monetize it, and then essentially there's an API for rights that's wrapped around every single piece of content you upload. And you can provide skin in the game. You can provide incentives for people to build on top of your IP and expand it together, right? And I think that's going to get even easier with AI, because now you don't have to only target people who went to film school or went to art school who know what they're doing, but now everyone can build on top of content, create high quality content, and they can expand and work with you. And it almost turns this IP into a network or platform where you can have positive some incentives on both sides, rather than this antagonistic relationship that creators typically have right now, or studios I should say typically have with their fans, which is, hey, please, like, don't create fan fiction, don't create t-shirts, don't monetize, and if you do, we'll sue you, right? So it turns this antagonistic relationship where a creator is like, at best struggling to strike out on their own, or even worse in most cases, they're just getting their IP paid for like a commodity, to one
Yeah.
where creators can own their IP as an asset and then allow other people, their fans, their community, to build on top of it and win together.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very much in line with us. I was just bringing up our shop here too, as you were mentioning, kind of selling T-shirts and the idea. I mean, very much so. We are not a huge team here at Coinage, but through Shopify and everything else, we can sell things, and we have sold things. Texas, I don't know if you've seen this too, but we've got the Satoshi Nakamoto bucket hat, which is
Oh, there
a
you
huge
go.
seller for us. But it is
Never
cool to
miss a
see.
chance to advertise, and this is
Never,
exactly,
baby.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is
that's
exactly, I think, what the internet has done for a lot merchandising and a lot of other small businesses. But I think, imagine if you could do the same thing with IP. Like, you
rule number
have
one of the game.
a character that you created, right, that anyone can purchase and use immediately without
Yeah, well,
needing a lawyer to sort of create a licensing deal.
let's dig into that too, though, because this is kind of the infographic, right, that helps explain kind of proof of creativity and kind of how this all works. And I think it is really cool. As I was digging into it, the idea of, okay, Story starting out, they've kind of got their own blockchain, Cosmos SDK, and the idea of an EVM compatible kind of chain, all the technical components there that our audience often does care about. But I think what's exciting about this conversation specifically is kind of going the next layer up, where you kind of have an ERC 721 set up around, okay, any creator can come and kind of create something that then can be tokenized for other people to use, which gets into, I think, again, the difference between kind of what we're building and what you guys are building is more of a focus on the broken IP market. But my question for you, Jason, on that is, okay, how do you envision that kind of, I guess, scaling? Because so much of what I understand some of that to be in terms of those negotiations are kind of like one-off. How does kind of tokenizing it help improve maybe some of the issues in the past in terms of negotiating with an individual creator and what else is out there? I think that's also a part of the technical component here, is that a creator can set exactly kind of what they want to license out, and then you have a marketplace where people can more easily find some of that stuff that otherwise would have just been sitting in a file cabinet somewhere, probably.
Yeah, and I think you pointed out to, you called it the differences between what Coinage is doing and what Story's doing, but I would almost say that we're just doing it at different layers. And I think that, projects like yours are really exciting, and actually seeing some of these early experiments is what inspired us to build Story, which is that it's very exciting to see these experiments in decentralized IP and sort of software-based IP that I think a lot of early NFT projects were also trying to realize that vision, but it's very, very difficult to build out without the right tech stack. So what we're trying to do is almost build the infrastructure that allows projects like Coinage to exist really easily and not need a lot of bespoke integrations, not need to build up this entire legal stack from the ground up. And so I think it's very synergistic, and like the more projects like yours and the more Coinage is successful, I think that's the better for us as well, because it's a proof that this concept actually works. But in terms of what we're trying to scale and what we're trying to build the infrastructure for, it's exactly what you said, which is right now we're still living in this pen and paper world of bespoke legal contracts, massive legal teams, and this really expensive, opaque legal system. Which means that right now, unless you're in the top 0.1% of artists, creators, institutions, studios, you basically don't have access to IP, and that's a shame because IP is the world's largest asset class. It's a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. But for most people who, if you have an Instagram or if you're running a small business, you probably own IP, but you really can't touch it because you're not going to go and afford that legal team. You're not going to go and negotiate with large studios by yourself. And so the idea is, like with many other things that we've seen blockchains do, is can you actually replace that system, that pen and paper legal system, with software? And so
Yeah.
the vision very much is to replace law with code and to turn code into law. And so essentially any sort of terms that you want to set around your IP, instead of having to get a lawyer to represent you and track and protect all your revenues and undergo that extensive process, you can basically embed that into software terms. And we back that one to one with the legal contract that we've built. So it's not just pure software. I think that's a very important point to make. We build out these smart contract terms where you can set, hey, how much do you need to pay me upfront to license my IP? What are the recurring royalties? And that's all enforced and automated by software, but it's also backed one to one by the law. So we've actually spent a lot of time and effort and capital building this license that essentially maps one to one with our smart contract. So you can be assured that if you register something on Story and then you want to take it to Disney and maybe they don't care about what's happening in the smart contract world, you actually do have a legal text that you can bring to them that shows that you own this IP and that people have licensed it. And so I think that's what we're trying to do, is
Yeah.
essentially, as the first wave of blockchain was really about bringing the monetary system on chain, replacing that pen and paper world of the financial system with these digital assets. I think what we're trying to do is do that for law and actually start to replace the long tail of this very expensive legal system with software.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because I think, increasingly, if you're going to be dealing with creators or people who aren't experts in blockchain, and we've seen this too, as we've worked with more creators, is that a lot of that needs to be abstracted away, or at least you need to do some things off chain to make sure that you're also checking the legal boxes and you're not going to get sued either, or that protections are there when disputes arise off chain, because certainly we've seen enough of those in the Web3 space as well. But I do want to give maybe a concrete example for where some of what you guys are working on clicked for me, and it raises a question about who you guys might see as your demo as you continue to grow. Obviously, still very early days, but I think really cool to see everything coming together. And now, from what I gather, it seems like you might be more focusing on helping creators on ramp now using Story. But I think this might be salient for a lot of people who were just watching the Olympics and kind of want to get your take on the other side. But it was this Al Michaels example of them creating daily recaps of Olympics coverage using his voice at NBC. For those who didn't see, just want to play a quick clip of it and then get your take on the other side, Jason. Here's Al Michaels' AI daily sports recap for the Olympics.
Welcome to your daily Olympic recap, your personal rundown of yesterday's most thrilling Olympic moments. Since you're a swimming fan, let's head right to the pool. Team USA secured a stunning victory in the men's 4x100 meter medley relay, smashing the world record.
All right, so you might not know, but for those who didn't see that before, that's just Al Michaels' AI trained voice kind of reading daily recaps. And I think that was really interesting because obviously Al Michaels has a signed contract with NBC Sports, and so he's already kind of integrated there. But you can kind of see how this would work for a lot of other creators that might not be as large as Al Michaels, where you can take recordings of yourself and say, okay, train my voice to read anything. And then a brand says, hey, we want you to read this ad. Maybe you don't have time to do it, but you're like, okay, you can use my voice. I'm curious, Jason, if that's kind of how you look at maybe some of this as early examples, or kind of maybe if you don't think that the Al Michaels of the world will need any of this because they're already large enough to where they got an agent and probably a team to do all of it, but more like micro influencers who are a little bit smaller that should enjoy the same protections as an Al Michaels.
Yeah, I think this is, I mean, I actually didn't see that before. That's a really great example. And we've seen other examples like this. Well, I'm not sure if you saw Heart on My Sleeve, which was a remix created by a guy named Ghostwriter in his bedroom and used Drake's voice and The Weeknd's voice to create this remix of a Drake and The Weeknd song. And that went to #1 on SoundCloud. It was on Spotify for a while. Of course, it was not approved by either Drake or The Weeknd or their teams, and so it was eventually taken down. But I think we're only going to see more of this, and this is going to be not just for big creators like Drake and The Weeknd and the example you just showed, but it's also going to be for up and coming creators as well. And so I think those up and coming creators are actually going to be the ones that are going to experiment with this model the most. But I think it is really exciting on the one hand because it allows creators to scale their content and their IP, and as you said, their time. But on the other hand, in the Drake and The Weeknd example, it's a little scary too because if you've authorized it, that's one thing. But if you haven't, then now your voice is everywhere. Anyone can create a song with your voice, and they can potentially capture some value without you having any permission over that. And so our thesis is that yes, this is the future of creativity. It is AI scaling and generating content on behalf of your voice, your image, your style, whatever it is that it constitutes your IP. But instead of a lose-lose situation, which is how I'd categorize it today, if it's unauthorized, where let's say I'm Drake and someone's creating a song with my voice, I'm not generating any revenue. Also, that person who is creating that remix and spending all this time coming up with the great lyrics, they might be getting sued, or at the very least, they're going to get taken down, right? And so right now, if you're a fan or if you're the original creator, you're not getting anything, and so no one's really winning. But can we take that and turn it into a win-win, where if I'm Drake, then now I have this army of creators that can actually leverage my voice, and if they monetize, then that's great for them, and it's also great for me. I think that's where you really see IP becoming a platform in and of itself, where you see it becoming a network, and you can have these network effects where the more and more people are building on something, the bigger it grows, and the better for everyone who's participating in it because you have this ability to share upside. And so essentially, that's kind of the future that Story is building for, is one where everyone's a creator because of AI, and as a result, we're going to need to have clear, transparent terms that can operate at the speed and scale of the internet, where anyone can be able to leverage using AI someone else's IP and follow the terms that that original creator has set. So 100% we see this as the future, but also we see it as a risk if there is no stable infrastructure that makes it clear how you can use these Lego blocks. So it can either be really good, or I think it can be a real mess. And right now it's this sort of new Napster moment where we have this crazy technology, but not a stable way to monetize it.
Yeah, no. It's actually interesting that you used the Drake example, because that was the one that jumped out to us last season as well. We dug into how all that's playing out, and how it could potentially also help save a lot of the musicians, where people are now using their catalog of songs to create things without any attachment to them whatsoever. And when it's fully just AI doing that, you can arise a bunch of different situations where artists are not getting paid. So I do think that is an important one. And we kind of had the same takeaway. Actually, that episode came from one of our members too. So shout out to whoever that one was. But Jason, maybe it's a good segue into kind of further exploring where we might differ on this, on the idea of IP, and maybe where prior projects didn't pan out and why they didn't pan out. Because I think, there was, as we said, a lot of excitement in those 2021, 2022 years around, okay, look at all the stuff NFTs can do for creators, or what it can do for kind of ownership in the era of Web3. And I'm thinking of maybe Bored Apes being one example to test you on, and maybe where you and I might see things similarly or differently. But when it comes to IP, I wonder if the idea of kind of this 10,000 PFP collection, one of ones, the reason why we built Coinage as a DAO co-op where people can buy NFTs and become members in co-owning what we are building, is because I saw kind of fragmentation. If you have like a bunch of the same art, we saw like maybe 5 Bored Ape TV shows get greenlit. I think Seth Green was one of them, who was kind of licensing his Bored Ape. But then it was like everything was watered down, because I don't want a 5th Bored Ape TV show if I already got 4 other ones I could watch. And so that kind of idea of fragmentation of IP was maybe one red flag for me in terms of what not to do. But I'm curious if you've seen maybe examples or things in the past that maybe you'd say shows tragedy of the commons things to avoid, or kind of what did you see as examples that maybe A, got you excited, or B, maybe said, I would do something differently?
Yeah, well, a few points. I think maybe 3 points to make here. One is that I think what Bored Apes and Yuga have done is very exciting, but I think there are still fundamental limitations. And I'll give you the example. You mentioned licensing. I think for example, the whole idea of tokenizing IP is to make licensing very easy. But if you think about how do you actually license something like a Bored Ape or an Azuki, it's still very, very difficult. So if you had a Bored Ape, I had an Azuki, and I wanted to create a comic using our two characters, how would I do that? Well, I would have to read my license from Azuki, which is on a PDF somewhere on the internet. I had to try to understand that. Then I had to go read your license that Yuga Labs gave you, try to understand that. And then I need to find a way to contact you somehow. And then we'd have to do some sort of deal together. Like, how do we split the revenues of this comic book? In what situations can I use your character? And then we have to probably get a lawyer on both sides to make sure that, we're accurately represented. We sign this pen and paper legal contract. And then one of us has to trust the other that, the royalties that they're reporting and sending to the other are actually accurate, right? And so to sort of take that idea and make an analogy, it's almost like in DeFi, if I wanted to create a DEX swap on Uniswap, I'd have to talk to my banker, KYC. I'd have to go find a counterparty manually, and then they'd have to go talk to their banker, KYC, and then we could finally execute a trade on Uniswap. And at that point, you might as well just not use Uniswap because it sort of takes away the whole point of putting this on chain. So our thought is, even on the infrastructure level, there's still a lot of friction. On Story, the idea is like you just register your Bored Ape. I can see every other Bored Ape that's been registered. I can see the terms that their owner has set. And if I want to use it, then I follow their terms. I click a button and boom, I have a real legal license for that Bored Ape. And I don't have to talk to anyone. I don't have to, understand any complexities around the legal system. I can just frictionlessly leverage that IP. And so I think there is just like sort of an infrastructure upgrade that Story can offer. And we are talking to a lot of these projects about doing that, including Yuga. But I think that's the first point. The second point is I do think that IP in general, it's kind of a hit space business, right? It's almost like venture. And so I don't think the story or the verdict is out yet on Bored Apes, but I will say that, even Christopher Nolan and other, amazing creators, sometimes it just doesn't work out, right? So I think sometimes it's not the technology or the model or anything other than the content itself. And it might take many different tries. So maybe Pudgy or Azuki, maybe these other projects are going to have just underlying content that appeals more to people with basically the same model. And so it may not be the technology or the model that's broken. It could just be that this IP isn't really speaking to people. And then the last thing I'll say is to your point around IP fragmentation, I think that is a real risk, right? I don't think Game of Thrones would be a better IP if George R. R. Martin basically just like asked a Reddit thread what he should do in every single book or the TV show of every single episode. And so I think that is a very good point. In my opinion, there's going to be many different models of content creation. Some will be fully bottoms up. Some will be very top down and only allow fan creation at the very edges. And I think that there's going to be the sort of marketplace of IP where people have different structures that they're setting on chain. And some will be very CC0, some will be very top down. And we'll have to see which ones work the best for what types of content and what types of communities. But I do think it's very early innings and there's going to be some sort of evolutionary process. In my opinion, I do think there needs to be a sort of central tree trunk or a trunk of really solid IP created by experts that then others can build off of. I do think that's kind of an optimal model. And maybe that's something that's lacking in the current NFT collections where it's fully bottoms up. It's like, hey, here's some, images and now go and create this whole world. Maybe you need a little bit more scaffolding from the original creator or the original team in order for that organic activity to really take off. There needs to be something for people to latch onto. And I think that can be a model that's pioneered. And I think we'll probably see a lot more of that as the space matures.
Yeah, I think that was kind of where my light bulb went off too, though, is creating this brand first, coinage, and then seeing what happens. And when you give up that control and ownership to your NFT holders, it has created some weird symbiotic relationships. One of our guys who's actually, I don't even know where he lives. I know he's not in the US, but he's like, you guys should partner with this Austrian validator company. And so now Coinage X Dike exists, and we're running validators on all these chains. And all of the rewards, 50-50 split, is going back into our DAO co-op. So it's kind of, that is in effect a licensing deal, by the way. And I would have never known about it if one of our members hadn't brought it to me. And a platform like yours for creators like me sounds very exciting. And the idea of, okay, I've created something, now what can we do with the value that I've created? And that's something that certainly nowhere else could it have existed because I wouldn't have known about it if this guy didn't flag it to me. So I think that there's so many different ways that will be coming in this era where creators can unlock the value of their creations if there is something like what you're building. And so I think it's super, super cool and super exciting to see you guys now doing this and seeing it scale. I know a lot of our viewers and our members also had questions about what comes next. If Jason and co have been building Story Protocol for 2 years-ish, if that's even accurate, on this idea of, okay, what comes next? Obviously, you guys have been saying you're kind of in this testnet phase. From a production roadmap, what should people keep eyes out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been live on our first ever fully public testnet for about 2 weeks now. That came out late August, and so that's the Iliad testnet. There's around 10, I would say almost probably more than 10 as of now, applications that are fully functioning on that testnet. But we're gonna have another one in late October called Odyssey. So that one is going to fully take the place of Iliad, and it's going to be essentially a brand new testing environment. We're going to ask everyone to migrate and all the users start using that testnet. And then we're aiming for a mainnet launch around the end of the year, if not very, very early next year. So the team at Story, especially the engineering team here in the Bay, is really heads down sprinting to make this happen. But we have one more testnet to go, and then it's going to be, all systems go on mainnet near the end of the year or early next year. So that's the plan. Everything is fully functional, so you can use our documentation. You can permissionlessly call our API, SDK. And then also, of course, if you're a user, just use our applications and let us know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's exciting to see. Not to say that this isn't a technical project, because clearly it is, and we didn't dive too much into the details, but I think it's cool to start to see projects where non-crypto native or non-developer native people would start using it, and that kind of being where usage takes off. To your point, and kind of what we opened with, it's more where people spend their time anyways, in terms of consuming content than trading money all the time. And some of that stuff as an industry, frankly, gets boring. So I've enjoyed this conversation to finally not only be talking about technicals all the time. But Jason, to kind of wrap up, I am curious for you, having already kind of, checked the boxes in terms of raising, I think a lot of the stress probably, I assume, is maybe out of the way now. Maybe not. Founder life never ends. But for you, I mean, kind of what are you excited about personally in kind of the next chapter for Story, and what you want to achieve with it now that you've built, I think, a lot of the technical components and network here? What's Jason's excited about most next?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think like I'm a very product-oriented person, so obviously we're very fortunate to have raised this Series B. But to me, that that just it makes it more exciting and it adds more pressure in some ways to deliver something that is really awesome and can work long term. And so the tech is always evolving. So I would say what we launch even at mainnet is very much I would say almost a V0, like a very early stage experiments. And I think that things will continue to change, and we're going to continue to iterate this over a very long period of time. So I really push back against, and this is not something you mentioned, but I do push back against the trend in our space of like, once it's on mainnet, it's just, that's it forever. I think that's very much just a starting gun. So the tech will evolve, but even more importantly, now that we have this foundation, even now on testnet of just being fully permissionless, what's really important to me is that we have one or two killer use cases that just would not be possible without Story. So my top priority as a founder is working with this next generation of consumer entrepreneurs that are betting on the infrastructure that we're building, and just getting in the weeds with them, making sure that they're serving their users, that they're serving their creators, and that we can have a few very, very visceral success cases that we can go and show Hollywood, that we can go and show, X, TikTok, YouTube, these Web2 platforms, and actually start to push the space forward through competition. I think that's the only way that this is ever going to work in the long run, is that you just have a few killer apps that make it extremely obvious how Story works, and then also why it's more competitive than the existing model. So to me, it's all about working with the ecosystem, working very, very closely with entrepreneurs, and it's not something that's scalable. Like I don't think this is, it's not like a self-serve onboarding process. It's something that is going to require a lot of just manual work and understanding to make sure that we can build these success cases. But that's to me the ultimate goal. And there's no
Yeah.
world where Story is like, successful without those killer apps. And so that's really where I'm focused right now, is incubating those.
Yeah, more. And you mentioned the competition piece too, and I'm sure you saw Sony also unveiling their layer two, though it does seem that that's more attached to gaming. But kind of interesting to see Sonium, the layer two network, launch not too long ago too. And I'm sure if you and I both agree here, I'm sure there's other people out there who are agreeing that IP, creativity, everything built around that is kind of the next big opportunity to bring on chain. But for everyone watching, I mean, obviously A16Z has bet on you guys thrice now, I believe. But for everybody else watching, I think, as there are other blockchains that launch and try and come after the same opportunity, how do you think about like kind of the actual Web3 piece for creators who are using the platform, or maybe other people who just want to speculate on it? What does that look like in terms of unlocking ownership? Have you thought about that yet? Are there any token ideas yet? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I can't talk anything about the token, but I can say that ultimately our goal is that blockchains in general are abstracted away. And so I think a lot about this with AI, where if you watch Netflix, which I think most of us do, you finish a show and then there's this timer that says in 10 seconds you'll be recommending another show. Behind those 10 seconds are some of the most advanced recommendation algorithms in the world, and the people that create them get paid millions of dollars a year to do that. But there's nothing saying, hey, this new recommendation is powered by cutting edge AI and you should really trust it, right? It should just be a good recommendation at the end of the day, and you shouldn't have to know exactly what's happening under the hood. I think if Story is going to be successful in the long run, that blockchain element is going to be invisible to everyone except for certain developers that actually want to integrate directly with our smart contracts. Even developers that are building these traditional businesses are using Story through our API, which abstracts away a lot of the details of any blockchain infrastructure. And I think that true internet protocols, and Story does aim to be an internet protocol, they're really not, they're kind of invisible. So, I mean, I'll give you an example, HTTPS, right? Every single day you use HTTPS to, load web pages, but no one is, celebrating that as their favorite product. Or the domain name system, which allows us to have very human readable domain names. Obviously, we use that every single day to access different web pages, but no one is raving about how great the domain name system is and why they're a super fan of that product. So I do think in the full success case of Story, it will be fully invisible, just like HTTPS, just like SMTP, just like the domain name system. I hope that it's so invisible, but secretly behind every single piece of content that you see on TikTok or on YouTube or on X, maybe there's like a little Story blue check mark that you can see. But really, I do think that that's a success case, is that all the complexities of the technology are abstracted away. And it just serves as a sort of boring internet architecture that operates behind the scenes.
Yeah, it has been pretty funny to watch all the high flying teams and projects, and I'm not putting us in that category, but almost everybody realizing at the same time that a lot of this is going to require abstracting away the very piece that kind of got all the crypto nerds excited about things being on chain, is that we're going to try and convince
Yeah.
people that it's not even there anymore in this next chapter. But I agree. Jason, I know we're at time, but thank you so much for coming on. We'd love to have you back as you kind of roll this out. Congrats again on the raise, and congrats on everything that you guys have built at Story. Story Protocols co-founder Jason Zhao. Thanks again, man. You got to come back soon.
Thanks a ton, Zach. Really excited about what you guys are building at Coinage, and really appreciate you having me.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate it. We'll chat again. For everybody tuning in, thank you again. We'll see you next time.